Well, welcome everybody to episode two of Green Talks with Passages International. Darren, thanks for coming back on and being a part of this and bringing us kind of the expert advice on and perspective on green and natural burials in the funeral space. So, give a quick introduction to who you are again for those that may not have watched our last episode.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Ryan. My name is Darren Crouch. I'm the co-founder and president of Passages International. And Passages International specializes in biodegradable urns, scattering urns, woven and wicker caskets for natural burial. And we've been in business for 20 years.
Awesome. Well, Darren, last time we talked a lot about the first green burial official green burial conference that you were a part of last year, and we ended our conversation looking at the consumer selection process on scattering and how the data supports that that is an option that consumers are choosing, but the selection in the funeral home isn't matching that consumer demand. So, can you talk a little bit about that? How are you guys addressing that consumer data and helping funeral homes better serve those families in the selection room?
Right. We see ourselves, I mean, we are an urn and a casket company, but we also see ourselves as a problem solver and a resource for funeral homes to help them cater to this new consumer, whether it's a consumer that wants green burial or is looking for cremation and tends to do something other than go to the cemetery and inter that urn at the cemetery. And I feel like there's a disconnect. Well, it's not just I feel like, I mean, I do feel that way, where there is a disconnect between what the consumer is demanding and what the funeral home is offering. And that feeling of mine is actually borne out in independent studies.
Mhm.
One of them was done last year by the NFDA, the Consumer Preferences Survey, that said I think it's about 50% of consumers are interested in scattering. Only about 7 or 8% intend to take the cremated remains home. And
Hmm.
I would guess that most of them scatter, and probably 10 to 12%, and I'm paraphrasing the data, but it's in that range of people intend to go and inter at the cemetery. So, what we're looking at Passages is, well, if only 15 to 25% of families intend to permanently keep the urn and put it on the mantelpiece or take it to the cemetery, then surely it should make sense that when a family comes to a funeral home, that 25% of the urns are designed for that function,
Hmm.
and the other 75%, 50 to 75%, are designed for scattering or biodegradable burial, which is what the data is saying. So, when a family comes into the funeral home and it's that time for them to go and select a container into which the cremated remains are placed, and they walk into that selection room, and 80% of the urns, even in a progressive funeral home, are bronze, marble, decorative, wood, then it's really no surprise that that family's like, well, hang on, okay, I don't see anything that's going to meet my needs. What do you have temporarily that I can
Hmm.
take the remains home with and then go find something appropriate for what I want to do? Um, and we're working with funeral homes to really, I feel like it's not a sales process; it's an education process where even the most progressive funeral directors, even those that go to conventions and, read your daily newsletters and this type of thing, sometimes they don't even get this data. I mean, that report was 30 or 40 pages long, and we had to extract that data
Hmm.
from that report. And there's lots of other interesting business data for funeral homes in that report. But I think the first step is to educate funeral directors and have them acknowledge that this is actually not just Passages and other suppliers saying it, but it's actually a phenomenon that we need to pay attention to and attempt to align more closely with those consumers.
Absolutely. I mean, it's forcing consumers into the black box, which isn't going to satisfy them when they leave, which is bad, goes back onto the funeral home and there's a bad taste in the mouth of the consumer. So, I mean, what does Passages have available to kind of address the scattering need?
So obviously we have a full selection of products that are designed for scattering. I mean, we have over 20 different scattering tubes, which is basically a paper cylinder with a printed image on it that's engineered and designed specifically for scattering. The beauty of it is it's affordable. It's affordable for families because it typically retails for around $100, give or take, depending on the market the funeral home's in. And it's a product that can also be profitable. So it signifies to families, hey, the funeral home has actually given some thought to what the family wants to do, and has engaged with a company that has created this unique, custom, affordable, dignified, functional product that is designed exactly for the purpose that the family wants to use it for. I think the other thing that we're trying to educate funeral directors on is that people think in their minds of scattering, and we think of the sort of traditional scattering, sort of the pouring of the cremated remains out of a container, into the wind, as you say. Um, but I think there's other options there that allow families to have that similar experience without some of the potential mess that comes along
Mhm.
with scattering, particularly on a lake or at sea. And there's this huge attraction around scattering over or in water. And we have a lot of products that are designed for that. And so I think it's important that funeral directors they don't hear the word scatter and they think, oh, either I'm not going to sell an urn because I don't have anything for scattering, or it has to be $100 scatter tube because we have biodegradable turtles, we have urns shaped like seashells, we have urns that are designed um, to enhance the scattering process and create this very memorable experience that hopefully families will never forget and will be like, hey, that service that I went to was really cool versus that service that I went to, it was pouring rain, it's boring as hell, blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
you know and so we're trying to help funeral homes provide products and services that align with the values of the consumer, who is demanding, in my mind, a very different type of funeral experience. I believe wholeheartedly that the funeral experience itself has completely changed,
Hmm.
and consumers are looking for something very different. And the irony in all of this is that funeral homes are able to meet those needs. It's not like it's this impossible thing that they can't do. You know what I mean? I made this analogy last time we spoke about Uber and Lyft. If the cab companies had created an app,
Hmm.
if the cab companies didn't require you to take cash out of your pocket, if the cab companies enabled you to see where someone was at any point on their ride, if the cab companies enabled you to see who was coming, what the license of their car was, what their rating was, those are not super complicated things to do.
Right.
It just requires um, an understanding of what the consumer wants and trying to deliver that to them versus, as we talked about last time, trying to make the consumer come around to our way of thinking. We need to come around to the consumer's way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and we talked about that last time. And I think also we're kind of in real time right now seeing where consumer demands are coming to they're coming to the surface because in the midst of this pandemic, everything around the funeral process has changed. And the way that consumers want to engage with funeral homes from a technology standpoint has changed, which means that the way we present product, the way that we educate, like that entire process has to get up to speed of where the consumer is at. So, I think that that brings an important point. The For the funeral home to be able to serve that family that wants a green or natural process, the profession itself has to be educated as well. The consumer can't come in and be more educated than the funeral director. So, how can that be addressed? Like the funeral home needs to be educated so they can have these conversations.
Right. And I think, as human beings, not just as funeral directors, if we don't have a level of comfort with something, it's going to be very difficult for us to execute effectively on that. And I know that some of the products that we have do require some education on how to use them, how to sell them, how to merchandise them, how to market them. But we have a team of people that are always available to answer those questions, and we are actively working on ways that we can better educate funeral directors and provide them with better resources. I mean, we're looking at doing webinars that obviously would be free, where we can educate funeral directors, we can answer questions. I mean, but funeral directors don't need to wait for a webinar to call us up and ask a
Hmm.
question. Um, I think the Green Conference, we're looking at doing another Green Conference this year. That's obviously a very good venue. We were at trade shows. A lot of questions can be asked and answered at those venues as well. And so I think I'm a member of a CEO peer group, and I think, we talk about making time outside of our ordinary business lives, right? So, funeral directors are busy meeting with families, they're embalming bodies, they're preparing and executing services, but we have to make time outside of. I think the professional term is like flywheel. We need to be able we need to be able to separate ourselves for an hour or two a week and look at our business and say, what do I need to do on a social media or marketing level? What do I need to do on a service level? What do I need to do on a product level? Am I in tune with what's happening in my community? Do I have the data to support that? And really look at things sort of from 10,000 feet instead of
Hmm.
5 feet, right? Look down on your business. And they talk about, working on the business, not in the business. And I know that doesn't apply to funeral directors making arrangements, but to funeral directors that own and manage businesses. I think we need to be able to take a step back and really look at our business and see what it needs in
Yeah.
multiple different areas.
Well, that's a strength of being a good leader and a good owner is that you have to be able to curate and take care of your own business. And yeah, it's interesting because funeral directors, even owners, are not a lot of times in that position. They are meeting with the families every single day and absolutely working in the business, not on the business. So I think that education piece, and the time and season we're working through during this pandemic is forcing us to pay more attention to that consumer demand and what the consumer wants. Because
Right.
I haven't talked to a funeral director yet in the last 3 weeks that hasn't said, "Hey, families are wanting us to live stream funerals because we can't have gatherings. How do I do it?" Live streaming has been around for 15 years. I mean, there's funeral homes that have had it available for 15 years. This is not a new phenomenon, but
Right.
we've bucked a lot of the data. We've bucked a lot of the consumer trends because, well, this is death care and this is the way that we do things and this is the way it's always been. And we're seeing firsthand now that that doesn't work with the consumer anymore. And green burial and natural burials and having biodegradable urns and presenting scattering options like that just falls in line with what the consumer wants and where the profession has to get to continue to be relevant with the consumer. So, I applaud you for what you guys are doing and how you're shifting kind of your model to educate funeral homes better on not just what you have available, but the green conversation and natural burial conversation as a whole, and just educate the profession and help us level up with where the consumer already is at. So,
Right.
that's fantastic. Any closing remarks before we wrap up?
I mean, I guess the couple of things that I would say is obviously this pandemic is a very scary time and a very uncertain time, but I think for business people that are paying attention to their businesses, I think there are opportunities
Hmm.
in this as well, to change the way the business is conducted. And some of those, for example, if funeral homes are doing more live streaming, is that an opportunity to downsize facilities, for example, and lower overhead costs, potentially lower staffing costs? I mean, if you're not having 3 people man a funeral at a church, it's live streamed. There may be savings and changes in the way the business operates moving forward that actually benefit
Hmm.
the industry. I mean, I think it may also be a benefit to the consumer. I mean, no offense to any funeral directors, but nobody really wants to go to a funeral home. Let's face it.
Right.
And funeral directors may actually be better off if some of this stuff, if we could be taking more advantage of technology, where funeral families are making arrangements online, they're making arrangements via the phone, and for example, online, you know, the website is going to ask that question every time, versus a
Right.
person on the phone may only ask that question 50% of the time.
Yeah.
What do you intend to do with the remains? Oh, we intend to scattering. Have you thought about an urn? No, I haven't. Can I present some options for you that will help you, undertake this event that you're planning? And then for us at Passages, we are trying to be conscious of that. And we are reminding funeral directors that we have, a digital catalog that families can flip through, that you can literally email them the link. They can flip through product options on their phone. We have an online store for funeral directors. So if we're closed after hours or on a weekend, they can order a product. Um, we have our website. So, we're trying to educate them that, hey, just because families are not coming to your funeral home, it doesn't mean that you can't present options to them. And I think it also means that we can't, during this time, we can't just throw our hands up and say, no one's going to buy anything.
Yeah.
I think we still need to go through the process, and we still need to go through, what kind of container we're going to place your mom's body in for cremation. What urn selection did you want afterwards? What were her wishes? And still go through those things, because really at this point, for most parts of the country, we're still dealing with people that they're not COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
deaths for the
That's
most
right.
part. These are still, you know, people who are just going through the ordinary processes, if that makes sense,
Absolutely.
outside of like what New Orleans, Seattle, San Francisco, and New York, for the most part, other than the mandated restrictions from governors and the president, it's still everyday families that
Right.
funeral homes are serving at this stage, right?
Right.
I mean, if it really goes bad and funeral homes are dealing with lots of pandemic deaths, that may change things just as a necessity, in terms of there's only so much attention you can give to one family if you've got 30 bodies a day.
Right.
Um, but at this stage, I think, funeral directors still need, as best they can, to go through the steps that are proven to have worked.
Exactly right. Well, Darren, I appreciate you coming on and being open and discussing this with us, and absolutely look forward to episode 3 next month.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
All right, take care.
Take care.